friends, and welcome to my channel. My name's Angela. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this quiver and arrows using only Dollar Tree supplies. So let's jump into it. First I started out with this poster board from Dollar Tree, which I rolled into a tube using these clips to hold it together, giving me time to glue it in place. When I craft, I enjoy sitting in my big comfy chair and using my ottoman as my work surface, so that's where we'll be crafting at today. Once the tube was glued together, I used an additional piece of poster board to create a base for the inside of the tube to give our quiver a bottom. I decided to double up on the base just to make it a little bit more sturdy. I used the tube to trace an outline of the circle and then drew another circle further out. I then made cuts in the paper from the outside circle to the inside circle. That way I can fold them in and glue them to the inside of the tube, creating the bottom of the quiver. When I glued the two pieces together, I purposefully did not glue between the two circles I drew. That way I didn't have to worry about trying to cut through hot glue. Once the bottom was glued onto the tube, I took a piece of faux leather and trimmed it down to size. I then marked where the holes will go on the back side of the leather. Using the clips, I folded the leather in half, inside out, and used a hole punch to guarantee the holes lined up on both sides. Once the holes were in the faux leather, I realized that you could see the white behind and I didn't like that look, so I cut a strip to glue onto the tube to go behind the holes. Using the clips again, I clipped it in place along the seam to hold it in place while I glued it down. In most projects where I don't want to use hot glue, I will use Aleene's tacky glue just because it dries so much quicker than other glue brands. And the reason I chose not to use hot glue is because this leather is so thin that you would see it underneath. As you can see, I split this top piece into different sections so it would wrap around the top easier. I took a piece of jute, folded it in half, left the loop side at the top, and stuck the two ends through the opposite hole, then stuck those two ends down through the loop of the middle of the jute and proceeded to continue to lace the holes with that jute twine. This was definitely a trial and error on my part, and I did figure it out off camera before I came back and tried it on camera. Now this part is hard to see and I apologize for that. After I got to the bottom hole, I wanted the jute to end up on different holes, opposite holes from each other, so I stuck it through both of them through one hole and then another one back through the other hole so that they were opposite and I could tie them in a knot together. Clipped that knot down, and then at the top I cut the same little slits all the way around so that when I glued those down they would overlap. Now on this section I did decide to use hot glue as it will not be visible once the project's complete. I did glue down the bottom side where the two ends meet just to give it a more polished look. I took another strip of that faux leather and measured it out so I could make the handle of the quiver. Because this piece is folded, I did go ahead and use the hot glue, and it doesn't fold well, so I needed it to stick quickly. I then folded in the ends to cover up the seam, and then decided to use some jute to not only hold that seam down and secure it, but to give it a little extra embellishment. I wrapped it around 3 or 4 times, glued it into place on the back side, and cut off the excess. I then repeated the same steps on the opposite end. Using a lighter, I carefully removed the frays of the jute twine. For the handle, I wanted it to be secure enough to be able to pick it up by the handle, so I used these fasteners that I did pick up at Walmart. I swear Dollar Tree used to have them, but I couldn't find any. As you can see, these are the ones that once inserted you can pull them apart and then they're secure. Using the tip of the fastener, I kind of lined it up where I wanted it to go, and then taking an X-Acto knife, I made a small slit in the leather just big enough for the fastener to slide through. I then repeated the same process on the other side. Then using the same process, I figured out where I wanted it to sit on the quiver and pressed those fasteners down into the leather to leave a mark. Using the X-Acto knife, I put another tiny little slit in it so I could push them through. Then opened them up to complete the quiver. Now it's time to work on the arrows. I wanted to put slits in the sides of them for the fletching, which is the feathers or veins at the end of the arrow. So using my ruler and pencil, I just drew out some lines and repeated the process 3 times, as I'm going to have 2 arrows facing point side up and 3 arrows facing fletching side up. Taking an X-Acto knife, I carefully cut out the pencil drawn space I had made, removing a little bit of that dowel just so I could slide in the paper fletching that I created on my Cricut. The weeding tool of my Cricut to dig out the wood that was still in there. I then sanded down the rough edges. I also took a piece and folded it in half and kind of put it in the hole we created just to get any residual splinters out of it. Now, because this dowel is much thicker than the hearts I will be using, I had to use my weeding tool again to poke a little hole inside the dowel to slide in a barbecue skewer so that that barbecue skewer could then go into the heart. And I repeated this on all 5 of my dowels. I then cut off a portion of the barbecue skewer, keeping the pointy end, and using wood glue, I glued those into the hole we just created. Now, these are the only foam hearts I could find at any of the Dollar Trees I went to. If you can find the ones that come 4 or 5 in a bag on a skewer, I would suggest getting those. After removing them from the pick itself, there were these big pieces of glitter on there that I ended up scraping off using the weeding tool because I didn't want those to be visible when I painted them. Then, using some paintable caulk, I filled the holes that were originally there, as those are going to now be the points of my arrow and not where the barbecue skewer is going to enter them. Again, using my weeding tool, I poked a small hole in the top of the heart for the barbecue skewer. I inserted some temporary barbecue skewers, the excess that I had left after cutting them down, just so I could make it easy on myself while painting. I started out with red paint, going with the whole Valentine's Day theme, but then once I saw it next to the quiver, I realized that red wasn't really the look I was going for, and I wanted something a little more rustic, so I switched to black. I then moved on to the dowel rods, painting the shaft of the arrow white, and repeating that on all 5 of my arrows. I then trimmed off the excess of the shaft. I tried to make it into a point. This one split halfway down, so I decided just to stay with these wire clippers and cut it off a little bit, as the scissors were just a little too strong. I repeated that on all 5. Because of the difference in size between the dowel and the skewer, I knew there would be a gap between the dowel and the heart, so I used this yarn to cover that gap and give it a little more embellishment. Using a bead of hot glue to keep it in place, I tacked it down and then wrapped it many times just so that the yarn was as thick as the dowel rod. Once I had hit my desired thickness, I glued it down and cut off the excess. I did repeat this step on all 5 of the arrows. I could have gotten away with just doing it for the 2 that are going to be heart side up, but I chose to do it to all 5 to give the height to the ones in the back that will have the fletchings. Once that part was complete, it was time to attach the heart to the arrow, and I chose to use Aleene's tacky glue. Hot glue melts foam, so I chose not to use that, and this dries pretty quickly, so it was the best option. I did use the tip of my weeding tool again to kind of push the glue in and get out the air bubble that was created. Once that was complete, I used my Cricut to create and cut out some fletchings. When I designed these fletchings, I left this little piece sticking out so that it could slide into that slot that we created earlier. I made them a little long on purpose. That way I had excess to cut off and down to size, because I figured each slot was going to be different depending on how deep I cut it, how long, and all of that. So I started by dry fitting them first and then cutting off the excess. I did have to use my weeding tool a couple times just to get out some excess paint that had piled up inside the slots. Once it fit perfect and there was no gap between the paper and the dowel, I glued them into place using Aleene's tacky glue. I then repeated this process on 3 of the 5 arrows. Once I completed the arrows, I decided that the white wasn't the rustic color I was going for either, so I decided to kind of dry brush a little bit over the white with brown to create that wood look. Now that all my elements are complete, it's time to assemble this. I used some grocery store bags to place in the bottom to give it a little height. I also used another grocery store bag to place in the middle to stabilize the arrows so they didn't move around. And here's our completed project. If you enjoyed this project, make sure to like and subscribe because I have more Dollar Tree Valentine's Day projects coming your way.